We've seen some techniques in the previous video to create selections, and we learned also the reason why we need selections in the first place. But now I'm going to show you advanced selection techniques which are going to make selections almost automatically based on color and contrast in the images. One of these well-known tools is called Magic Wand. Now it already sounds promising. This is where you can find it in the toolbar, and once you select it, with this tool you can click on a certain area in the image and it will try to find all the similar colors in the area. So for example, if I click on these planks in the background, it will find all the similar colors, and based on the tolerance, which is up here, it will have the ability to expand to even less similar colors. So if I increase the tolerance further up, and by the way 32 is the default option, so if I use that, it almost manages to select the whole plank in the background. So let's just try increasing this tolerance even higher. Then if I click again, now it almost selected everything. Slightly has a bit of detail missing there on the right side, but instead of increasing tolerance, what you can also do is to hold down the shift key and click to add to the selection, and maybe another shift click here in the middle just to add that tiny little detail. And then we could do the same thing, shift clicking on this plank and that one and so on and so forth. So that way we could recolor these, for example, easily, or replace that with some other detail. But let's try the same technique on this orange sign. I'm just going to click on it and we can see it's been selected. But when I zoom closer, we will see that some details won't get selected, like these parts here in the middle. Now the reason for that is because the Magic Wand will always stop whenever it finds something different, so it won't be able to cross over this darker detail to be able to access the inner parts of these numbers. And the same applies to these colors here. Once again, the arrow divides the parts on the left and the parts on the right. Although they have the same color, they are divided. Now, to be able to jump over these divisions, you can turn off the contiguous option. Once you turn that off, and I start the selection again, now if I click anywhere on this orange sign, you can see it manages to jump over the arrow and also jump over these black lines, so it can select the parts inside and also the parts beyond the arrow. So I can then shift click maybe a little bit more at there, and then we pretty much selected the whole plank. Now we can just click on this side here, but that's when the problem starts. Because we have the contiguous off, it can actually expand into other parts as well, all over the image. And because this side of the plank, the darker detail, is actually more similar to this red color as well, then it means it will also include those details in our selection. But that's not something we want, so I'm going to go back, and you can always turn the contiguous option on and off. So this is a good selection, and we can zoom out just to check that there's nothing else selected. If there is, like this sign, we can always temporarily switch to the rectangular marquee tool. And remember, if we use the minus option, the subtract option, or just even hold down the Alt key, which is always going to give you the minus, meaning it will take away from the selection. So Alt or Option, click and drag, we can very quickly remove this if we didn't want that in the first place being selected. Once again, it was selected because we turned the contiguous option off, and it managed to leap over to that part of the image and select the same colors or similar colors to this sign. So now we can go back once again to the Magic Wand and then turn contiguous back on. So now I can hold down Shift to add to the selection and just click a couple of times until we have completely everything selected on this sign. So all the colors are selected. And then if we were to change the colors, we could go to the image menu, adjustments, and choose hue saturation. This is a very useful adjustment. which will obviously only affect the selected detail. And you can see we can very quickly match the other colors in the image, or we can also reduce the saturation if that's something what we wanted to achieve. If I click OK and then deselect, you can see we did a pretty good job. Only a little bit of the original colors show up, but that can be fixed quickly as well. So tolerance and contiguous options are useful, and there's also an option sample all layers, which might be useful when you start working with multiple layers. But let's have a look at another example. We have this burger here, and I would like to put this in front of this dog. So what I will do is make a selection, but not of the burger, because it's such a simple background. So it's shot obviously in a studio environment. So we have a perfect white backdrop. So instead of trying to select the burger, which has so many details on it, I actually start from the background. So I'm going to reduce my tolerance and click on the white background and check how the selection looks. Well, this bit is getting selected, that cheese, because it's so bright. I could either reduce the tolerance and then try until that doesn't get selected, but with a very low tolerance, my edge of the selection won't look as good. So I actually prefer to keep my tolerance a bit higher, let's say around 20. I click on the image, and I'm not bothered about selecting that bit of the cheese because we can fix that easily with another tool. But before I go ahead, I'm going to shift click, still using the magic wand, on the bottom details. So I would like to include these parts as well, and maybe we can keep a bit of the cast shadow. I can just maybe remove that detail there. So how do we fix this part here? Well, first of all, don't forget we have to invert our selection. Although we started our selection with the background, we actually wanted the opposite of that. But that's why we have the inverse options. So select, inverse, or Control or Command Shift I. And then now we have the burger. We can also double check by pressing Q. What's our selection? Yet it is the burger. So that's great. But before I drag this onto the other image, I'm going to switch back to the tool that we used previously, the lasso tool. And with this, by holding down Shift, I can very quickly draw over this cheese detail here, like that, and then it's added to my selection. So once again, you can see I started combining selection tools. So not only using one tool for a selection, but I combine these tools, and that's when they work really well. So using them on their own usually won't get you to 100% good selection. You will always need to be smart and pick the right tools, but also pick the right combination. So on the previous example with the sign, we used the rectangular marquee tool to remove some parts, and then mainly we used the magic wand. Here, we started combining the magic wand with the lasso tool. But now that we have our selection, let's see how we can move this onto another image. So here I already have the other document open, the dog image. So I'm going to switch back, select the move tool, and then click and drag it all the way up until my mouse reaches the document tab of the other image. Then drag my mouse back down. Still, I'm just holding down the mouse. And then when I let go, it will magically appear. So we can now reduce its size because it's humongous. So let's go to the edit menu and choose free transform. And I will hold down the shift key while dragging one of the corner points. Remember how to constrain the proportions of a detail. And then we can place this hamburger here in front of the computer, replacing the mouse in the image, something like that. That makes more sense for the dog to have something more interesting to look at. And when I press enter, we can see it came in as a separate layer. So because we extracted it from the other image, it looks almost perfect. Of course, it could be refined, but I'm pretty happy with this quick result. And of course, because it's on its separate layer, we could use the move tool, move it around. We can also turn the layer off if we want, or we can just put the hamburger on the dog's head, which makes an even more interesting composition. But let's go to one more example. Still with the magic wand, let's say we want to make the sky look a bit more exciting, because the foreground with the elephants is amazing, but I want to make the background more exciting as well. Now, another very quick and simple task for the Magic Wand tool, we can just simply click on the background and check whether it managed to select everything. If it didn't, then we can either decide to create a new selection with a higher tolerance or shift click on these details. So maybe I will increase the tolerance slightly and then I click again. Now these parts get selected, so it might be actually better to reduce the tolerance, something like that, and then just shift click on these parts until we get a good selection. And I'm pretty happy with that. We have a good selection all around, so we have a perfect silhouette there. And then one other way that you can knock out details is by unlocking your background layer. Click on the little lock icon here. In previous versions, you might need to double click on the background layer's name to be able to access this. So now that we have a normal layer, we can press backspace or delete to remove the details we selected, which prepared this image to get something new in the background. So it has now transparency there, and we can go to another image like this one, has a very nice sky detail. We can again do the same technique what we did before, use the move tool, click and drag this image onto the document tab of the other image, and then let go. Now once again, by default this image will come in as a separate layer but on top of the previous one. So all we need to do is to drag it underneath that, and then we can decide where the clouds should go. But you can see how quick and easy that was, again thanks to the Magic Wand. Now this all works perfectly, but once again there are even better ways of doing the same techniques, because one thing you should avoid is deleting details. So I lost the original sky, for example, here. And that is again a destructive technique. I keep mentioning this, but I'm going to get to the non-destructive workflow soon, where I'm going to explain how to do things like this better. Just like changing colors, instead of using a simple adjustment, we normally would use an adjustment layer. For replacing details, we wouldn't delete them, instead we would just mask them out. So that's what I'm going to explain, and there will be also a separate video about masking, because it is a very important part of working in Photoshop.